Hey guys, what's going on? Garrett, Ryan, Executive Training Group, typical intro. If you don't know what we do, check out our website, www.executivetraininggrp.com. That's where upcoming classes, all that stuff. Starting to kind of open up the traveling around. So if you're in a state you'd like us to come to, you have a range to host us, and 8 to 10 people that you think would take a class, shoot us a DM or shoot us a email. Don't shoot us a demon. Shoot us an email or a DM. Demons are in between email and DMs. Don't send us a demon.
I think that's just Twitter.
So yeah, guys, reach out and we'd love to come to you and do a class. Today's topic is actually going to be a little bit of a clickbait title. I'm sure that's what brought you here. So as always, we try and use clickbait titles to bring people in and then have a nuanced discussion about it, which is typically not how the internet likes to do things. But today's topic is why CQB sucks or you should avoid it. There's a couple points we want to make about why we're making this video, because the why is always really important to let you know kind of where we're coming from, what we think about this. So first of all, we like CQB. We made a civilian's guide to CQB. We have CQB classes. We just want to explain to people where it should fall priority-wise, maybe in your training and what we've seen coming from classes, folks taking CQB classes. So the first thing is it's overglorified by far. And it makes sense because guys that go do this in real life do this constantly, whether it's SWAT team, law enforcement, military, I don't care. It's pretty cool, in my opinion. You're willing to go do this thing that's really risky, and there should be a little bit of like, damn, that's crazy, right? However, it's also led to it being misprioritized in people's training, and basically seeing CQB as a kind of this really cool thing and looking to do it rather than looking on how to avoid it. And if we can't avoid it, how do we do it? That should be the mindset. Like, at all costs, avoid. If we can't avoid, here's how we do it, right? This will change given context, and context is another one of these big whys, is because this is a very hard subject for people to break down and kind of have that conversation. And Ryan, I think you articulate it better than me as far as context. I might add in a little thing, but I'll turn context over to you as far as like another reason why.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's important, guys, there's a lot of CQB courses out there taught by a lot of dudes who have done cooler stuff than Garrett and I, which is great.
Yeah.
We've taken CQB courses put on by previous Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, SWAT dudes, SF dudes. You can find all that out there.
Yep.
Where we have a problem is when we've gone to some of these courses, it's taught the specific doctrine of what their job was. Mm-hmm. And that I don't have a problem with. What I do have a problem with is it's devoid of context for all the mostly civilian and even law enforcement or whatever students in the class. So if there's not at least some kind of discussion about, hey, this is our SOP for how we did it on, I don't know, in the Marine Corps or something, that doesn't necessarily translate to civilians going through a house.
Yeah.
It's just not going to.
It will change your techniques. The situation that you're in can absolutely change your techniques. We kind of talked about that too in the civilian video, or in the civilian CQB guide, where we said situation, environment, and objective. And that's what we want people to realize, is that there's a lot of classes out there that they're not taking into account the situation, the objective, or the environment.
And I'm not saying don't go take those classes, because you can learn a ton of stuff from those people. You should go take those classes. You just need to know, you need to come as a logically thinking and relatively informed student and ask questions when questions need to be asked, no matter what their position is or was. Or
biggest thing that I notice is like when you have a question, it's in your head, and I've seen people do it to me where they don't want to question me because I'm a better USPSA shooter or because I have a military background, whatever it is. They're just like, well, I'm gonna maybe it's something I don't get because I wasn't there. And that is, for an instructor, that limits me so much, because you're just taking what I'm saying and you have a question about it that could expose maybe a lack of, my knowledge or whatever it is, and you're refusing to ask it, or when you ask it, I shoot you down. And that's what I don't want people. When you go to a class, you're paying for that information, you're paying for their experience, you're paying for all those things. They owe that to you, in my opinion.
There's nothing wrong with having that attitude of like, hey, he did a thing I didn't do, or he has way more experience in it, so he probably knows a little bit more than me. That attitude's totally fine, but don't let that prevent you from saying, hey, this thing's not adding up to me. This doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Because then you're not getting your money's worth. You're not growing as a student. You're not really thinking and really trying to apply this stuff.
You have platoons, you have outer cordons, you have ISR, you have all these logistics that are there in support of you doing that. So you can choose probably a lot more speed, violence of action, and like taking on multiple doors and multiple rooms and multiple things because you have multiple people, right? And as a civilian, if I'm working, or even as a patrol officer, you know, as a police officer, you're going in, you probably can't take on that many tasks. And so opening up a new task while you haven't dealt with this task is just not quite as, you know, advantageous for you. If you abandon all logic and all reason and you go, no, I mean, this is how this guy taught me to do it and he's so-and-so, it's kind of like an argument from authority. It's fine to have that authority, but it still needs logic to back it up. It still needs to make sense for the situation. I think too many people are on one side of that or the other, where they take way too much authority and they go, oh, that's all stupid, I don't have anything to learn from that person. Or they're too afraid and they glorify that person way too much and they don't want to step up and be like, hey man, that doesn't quite totally make sense. So yeah, just be aware of context. That's one of the biggest reasons why we're trying to provide how you guys should view it in context to your training, but also if you go take classes specifically to what's going on. And I think that's one of the biggest core reasons why that took so long, is because that's a huge why in making this video. Lastly, what we want to say is we're super pro civilians knowing CQB, okay? Super pro going and learning from Ranger Battalion guys, going and learning from Navy SEALs, going and learning from SF guys. Like, I don't care what it is. We are super pro you going and getting this information and training, clearly because we have CQB classes, right? We just want to provide a little bit of context to where we think it should fit into your training, where you will receive the most bang for your buck. Because at the end of the day, you are consumers of paying for training and doing these things. And it drives me nuts to see people not get their money's worth out of training. And it's not always the instructor's fault. I have taught many a CQB classes where I'm like, all right, I would like to be talking about this thing and just letting you guys work through and get reps and get your value out of this. But most of you don't know how to, you know, handle your weapons subconsciously. So guess what? I'm going to provide the best value that I can for the money that you have given me to do this thing. Yeah, so that's the why, guys. Also, you know, we're really good at holding instructors accountable, which I think is great. But we're not holding consumers accountable. And I think both of those things need to be done. We need to look at it and go, hey, why is it that we need clickbait on a YouTube video? Well, it's because most of us have the attention span of a gnat and don't want to have nuanced discussions about this, and we'd rather just argue about it and take a side in the comments section. All right, guys, so when we wanted to introduce this principle of distance negating skill, or as you close the distance, you also kind of close the effectiveness of your skill as a shooter, okay? So in order to demonstrate this, what we thought would be like, man, it'd be a really good idea to bring an unskilled shooter in, someone who's brand new. But the problem is we don't know a whole lot of like unskilled people when you shoot all the time. So the purpose of this drill, basically what we're gonna do is I'm gonna do a ready up from real close, about 3 yards away. This is what I would call a very common distance for a CQB engagement to happen, is that like 3 to 5 yard mark. So I'm gonna do a ready up and shoot 2 to the chest, and then I'm gonna switch to my non-dominant side, which I don't really train because I'm not a huge proponent of switching shoulders when we're this close to things. We'll talk about covering concealment here in a second. Yeah, so we're just gonna kind of do this to show you guys that you can get away with a lot more when we're super close, and people will try and get away with a lot more. Ryan did a really, really good example of this that you guys will see, of him hip firing and still getting hits on the target. All right, so here's what my dominant side looks like, guys. Okay, that is a 5.5 1.9 split. That is a mil-spec trigger. So now what I'll do is I'll do my favorite thing, switch to my non-dominant side, and I'm going to match that pace. Okay, so all things equal, that was a 5.9. So the purpose of this demonstration is, you know, when it comes to my right hand versus my left hand, I don't have my dominant eye, I don't have all these things. But when I'm so stinking close to the target, I can kind of just lift the gun up and generally point where I want the rounds to go. And under panic, when we're like, if we're the bad guy and we don't have to worry about positive identification, we're selfish, we're not thinking about innocent people, really frees us up to do like suppressive fire or just send rounds where we want them to go. And so when we're this close, we just really negate what a skilled shooter, the skills that we have. Now, that doesn't mean that skills don't matter, right? Where someone can lift up, they're relying on a little bit of luck. I'm not so much relying on luck. I can do this over and over and over and over again to a higher standard than they can. So this might sound like I'm saying skill doesn't matter up close. It just doesn't tend to matter as much. You're relying a lot more on luck at that point. I think that was a Charlie and an Alpha.
and .67. So guys, the point being is that CQB distance gunfights are often what we call a 50-50 gunfight, where the skill of the operator or the individual may not matter. The shooting skill at least may not matter as much. If there's a guy just sitting here waiting for you, hip firing with an AK, he's just waiting for you to walk through that door. You might come through with the sexiest, footwork and gun manipulation. It's all hot and stuff, and you guys are still exchanging rounds. The factor that can change this is distance. But what distance will buy you is it'll buy you time. It'll buy you time, and it will increase the skill gap, the shooting skill gap of you and whoever your adversary is.
We obviously did the drill up close. What we've done now is we moved back to about 20-25 yards, and basically what we're doing is same exact drill, but we're just going to show at this distance, all manipulations on my right side and on my left side being the same. It takes so much longer for me to put accurate shots on that piece of steel. All right, so here's my dominant side, 2 shots on the steel. All right, that was pretty spicy actually. That was an 8-3 total time, 8-3. And one of those went a little bit high into the head, but I'm trying to really push that engagement, go, hit the target. All right, so if we switch over to my right hand, and I'm just gonna swim out of the sling so that the sling is just kind of not a factor. Because again, right now we're not talking about switching shoulders. We're just trying to show a skilled, what's subconscious and drilled versus don't spend so much time on my left side doing these manipulations and whatnot. Got a couple misses in there over the right shoulder. So 306, right? I could clean that up. As I trained my left side, I could get better with my left side. Again, we're not talking about left side versus right side. We're looking at trained versus untrained. What's likely to happen? My right side, my dominant side, is more consistent, more subconscious, and will respond better to my demands of it. And up close, we just give luck so much more to do with what's going on than when we're at this distance. So all of this is simply to just get you guys to understand, if you create distance and you're the better shooter, you're doing yourself a service as far as increasing your odds of surviving. If you get all up and close and personal, you're kind of doing that less skilled shooter a favor because they suck at this distance. You should be good at it. They're the untrained person, right? That's the purpose that's the point we're trying to make with this. Is one thing that really sucks about CQB is crappy shooters are at an advantage compared to when we're shooting at 15, 20 yards away. Cover and concealment when it comes to CQB. This is a heck of a topic. I just want to throw some things out for you guys, things that I've discovered as I evaluate. I bounce ideas off of other folks and some issues. So the first thing, let's just logically talk about angles of exposure, which is a huge thing in CQB, but actually just in general, right? And what I mean by angles of exposure, it's like, how are you looking at me? What are you able to see by me? It's kind of a judgment of, am I using cover and concealment as effective as I possibly can? Okay, so I'm in my hallway here. The hallway's not super wide. I can get from one side of the hallway to the other side of the hallway with basically one side step, right? So let's say for this purpose, if you don't know, first of all, the difference between cover and concealment, cover is something that will stop incoming rounds. Concealment is something that just will stop. It's a visual barrier, right? It's not necessarily, you can't count on it to stop rounds, and you shouldn't expect it to. So basically, if we're sitting here, right, and let's say I'm engaging a threat that's 3 meters in front of me. So they're basically at the end of the hallway. They're real close. And they take one big step, right? This is cover. It's going to stop bullets, right? I'm making really good use of it. My elbow's tucked in. I'm doing a really good job. They take one big step to the side, and I'm shooting over here now. How good is my cover, my use of actual cover now? It kind of just got blown out of the water. And this is due to, it's very easy to, even unintentionally for a bad guy, to completely change the angles of exposure with one big step. The closer they are, they take a step and they either close the angles of exposure or they open them. And both of those can be detrimental. You lose line of sight, things along those lines. So that's just something to logically consider, right? As I'm spending so much time making sure I'm in cover and concealment, and they're 3 meters in front of me, he takes one big step, and now all of this right here, my angle of exposure is opened up. When we have distance, when we have offset, that doesn't happen nearly as much. So if you add 50 meters to what we're doing, and I'm making really good use of cover and concealment, and he does that same sidestep, guess what? I might have to shift, about from here to here. And I'm still making good use of cover and concealment. And obviously, we come into the idea that taking that long shot, if someone sees that, it's probably a little less likely that they're just going to raise a gun and send a round at a target that's this big, versus when they're right here, it's they're going to feel like that person's right in front of them, right? So That's kind of the first logical thing I want you guys to think about is angles of exposure and how much kind of easier and more effective cover and concealment is when you have that distance and that offset, all right? Now, let's talk about kind of a sour pot subject, and I'm going to pick on myself so that you guys know that, you know, this is me trying to be transparent and that I'm trying to update, and when I make mistakes, make the training actually better for people, okay? So, you've heard me say limitations to simulations. Well, I think there's a major limitation that we don't necessarily pay attention to, and some of the guys that have done this at a very high level kind of helped me be aware of this, all right? So, simunitions and airsoft don't penetrate walls, right? They just don't. Now, I'm not going to go off on a tangent on will bad guys shoot through walls, will they not? It's kind of a coin flip. What I will say is it seems to be that they want visual confirmation of at least seeing something that they're shooting at, right? Oh, there it is, I can shoot at it, all right? So for them to be, I'm not talking about like you make a creaking noise on the other side of the wall and they're just like, pa, 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 pa. Probably not. Maybe a little bit more common in the military setting, but you know, for civilian, not as common, right? So let's think about that in terms of visually, that's what's gonna cue someone in to shoot at you, all right? I think we make a big mistake in assuming that a lot of what we're working around, we treat it like it's cover when it's most likely not going to be, okay? So if you look around in my house, there's pretty much no cover, right? Besides like appliances and a few things, nothing I can really rely on is cover. It is all concealment, so it's visual barriers only, all right? So if I'm sitting here on this wall and I'm so worried about limiting the amount that I'm exposing myself, when someone can just simply take a step and it completely expose me, not only that, but like if they see a little bit of me and they're real close to me, they're gonna just shoot at that little bit of me that's exposed. And because this thing doesn't stop bullets, is it really gonna do me any good to tuck back in here and try and utilize concealment once the gig is kind of up? I don't think so. I don't buy for that so much. So I'm kind of guilty of it, where it'd be like, you know, you're working an angle and you're like, da, da, you know, firing and you're stepping around trying to do this thing. And, you know, if you have cover, you know, if you're working around a hard wall, yeah, sure, you know, try and use that cover. But the problem is it's usually concealment. For most of us, that is the standard. It's going to be concealment. So I think that's a big kind of error that a lot of us make when we're training CQB. There's nothing wrong with going slow, being deliberate, paying attention, pieing things off. All that is fine. But just keep in mind, when you know bullets start flying, if they see you, if that concealment kind of gets broken, that they make visual contact with you, you know, rounds might be coming back at you, and if the thing that's in front of you is not stopping rounds, I don't think bad guys are really going to think like, oh, you know, there's not something that's going to stop them from by actually shooting the wall and having a round kind of go through that concealment. It's just not a very realistic bet, and so playing this peekaboo game around drywall is just kind of seems silly to me. What I'm going to prioritize in those situations, personally, I think mobility and putting rounds on that target are going to be way more important than was an inch of me concealed or not concealed, right? I don't think that's as valuable. Now, I'm not saying that means just step out into the middle of a hallway, you know, no, not necessarily. But the point being is that you should probably prioritize the things that you're going to be focusing on, which is putting rounds on that thing and moving. Is kind of my thought or my theory behind it. So that is, again, training marksmanship, getting to the point where your skills are subconscious and they support that type of reaction at a high level. I think a big problem that we have, guys, is every gunfight is going to involve shooting. You know, if you're using a gun, you're using that skill. And so people don't pay enough attention to that. They're not pushing that. They're not pushing the thing that's always going to be present if they're in that situation, right? But it is easier to sit here and talk about cover and concealment. Well, do we know that there's going to be cover and concealment in that situation? So we want to put our ducks in a row, right? We want to make sure that we get to the point where I can handle this thing so subconsciously that if you tell me to flip up and shoot or be moving and flip up and shoot, and I step into a room, it's very subconscious for me to do it. All I have to do is my conscious mind says, we need to shoot that target. You know, I lift the gun, flip off safe, press trigger, shoot, and put the round where I intended it to be. That is the thing that's going to be a constant in every single shooting, if God forbid you're involved in one, right, is your skill. So when we have people that want to spend exhausting amounts of hours talking about things that I think are pretty simple, right? You know, like to me, one that I see taught all the time and it drives me nuts is switching shoulders in CQB, okay? You know, we just showed how easy it is to quickly change angles of exposure. So if I'm sitting here at this doorway and, you know, let's say there's someone just standing on the other side of the doorway and I go, okay, I got to pie this corner off. I want to switch shoulders and I'm doing this, and then that dude takes one big step out of where I'm at, I'm off my gun, right? Is that as big of a deal if I'm 100 meters away, I'm tucked in behind cover, and I decide like, okay, I'm gonna peek this cover. All right, let me get behind here. All right, peek out, right? That's not as big of a deal when I have that offset. When that person can't rapidly change that angle on me. Or when, at 100 meters, if I have a malfunction, I can just tuck back into cover, deal with that malfunction, and it's not gonna be as big of a deal. All right, there's a hit. That was 261. Well. So, okay. All right, that was a 306, right? So the point being, at this distance, I don't think switching shoulders or not switching shoulders is necessarily gonna get you killed, but this is where the debate should be had. At this distance is where I think it's more valuable. If I have something right in front of me, if I switch to this other hand and there's a dude like right here, and I have a malfunction and I'm on my non-dominant side, then I'm gonna have to switch sides, reload, do all that crap. It just doesn't seem very realistic to me. Okay guys, so summing up everything that we said here today, really why this is important to me is when the rubber meets the road. That's all I care about for folks is I don't want anything that we're teaching or anything that we're showing people to provide a false sense of confidence. I really want to analyze it logically and go, hey, do I really, really believe that this is the way this thing is? Through logic, through common sense, through experience, through other people's experience, all that. When you look at CQB, why it's overglorified, why people, because it's one of the most dangerous things you can do. And if that's the case, you should look at that thing and be like, okay, maybe know how to do that thing, but avoid that thing at all costs. I think a lot of people go to the range and they spend their time with whatever scenario is in their head, acting like they're reacting, versus stopping and going, hey, it's very hard to make the flat range feel like a gunfight or anything. It's very hard to think about the target is doing this, I'm doing this. So what I've switched my mentality, having been one of those people that does that, I've switched my mentality to what do I think are the skills that I'm likely to need in reaction to something bad happening? And I just go develop those skills to the absolute highest capability to where, could be the easiest situation, could be the craziest situation. When I go do that thing, if I'm going through a building and I'm clearing a building, I'm never going to regret being more skilled. Being a faster and more accurate shooter, I'm never gonna be like, man, I should have spent more time thinking about, how cover and concealment or whatever. It's gonna be like, that's hard, that's dynamic, that's gonna change. So I think that's an important thing for people to just think, develop skills that will aid you in reaction, and then develop education that will give you the ability to react in a better, more appropriate way. Pretty good? A little long?
Yeah, I'm good.
My brain's pretty fucking fried too.
My part's in the last one, so I think I'm good.
I think that wraps it up. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video.